All right. Welcome, everybody, to Cyber Crime Junkies. I am your host, David Morrow, and in the studio today is my fantabulous, positive co-host, Mark Mosher. Mark, how are you, sir?
I'm doing wonderful, David. Thank you for that illustrious introduction.
It is
Appreciate
from
that.
it is from my new app. It's the insincere things to say to coworkers.
I may
So
need to get
it's
that on a
spreading
loop so I can do
wildly.
that on every Zoom meeting I get on and just have myself introduced to the
It's
group.
it's going to be a
Right,
thing,
right. Well,
man.
David, we've got a great episode today. We've got an exciting guest with us. Tell us who's in the studio today.
Yes, clearly we're not going to be the smartest ones in the room, which is great.
Which is pretty much always the way it is.
Usually always the way it is. So we're joined by Jamie Davidson. He's a cybersecurity attorney. He's a partner with the Chicago office of O'Hagan Meyer and is chair of the firm's data privacy and cybersecurity practice. He serves as breach counsel to companies of all sizes, and he's really seen it all. When you think of data security incidents, network intrusions, data theft events, fraudulent funds transfers and theft, we talk about this stuff all the time on the podcast. Ransomware attacks, we've heard of those. Jamie, welcome, sir. Thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great.
No, we're really excited. So one of the things we have a whole host of things, topics that we want to get to. But one of the things I found really interesting, your firm has a phenomenal reputation in this field. One of the cutting edge firms. You guys actually have a 24/7 like incident response hotline. Can you just share with us like when did you guys first roll that out and
Right.
and how does that work?
So
Really
we've
cool.
had that hotline for 7 or 8 years now, and the way that it first started is for some cyber risk insurance products.
Mhm.
Our firm we decided to have a little different model. The insurance company that puts this on had a little different model there. Instead of getting an actual claims handler from inside an insurance company, that they wanted an attorney answering the phone. So they could, because sometimes the, triage advice, those first few seconds are important to, if the house is on fire, at least put it out before the investigation starts, right?
Right.
Absolutely.
And so that's kind of how we got started with that. And then we just kept the hotline as our practice expanded into actually, breach coach and privacy counsel. We continued to operate the hotline that way. And just that way that people know, we become part of their incident response plan. And they know that as soon as something is, they see something suspicious or something's happened, they know where to call. And we always have the phone on one of the members of our team 24/7. And we, as the criminals love the weekend and after hours. So
Yeah.
that's why it's important.
Yeah, and holidays, right?
Holidays,
It seems
yeah.
to be
Yeah.
like holidays are
100%.
big. Yeah. So
Going back 7 or 8 years, that's
yeah,
that's really leading edge. That's kind of forward thinking. If you think back then, these conversations weren't really taking place that much. So the fact you guys came out with the hotline that far back, I think that speaks.
Right. We were dealing with $2,500 ransom demands and,
mhm,
some of the back in what now we would call the good old days. Right.
Right.
yeah,
And so, yeah, from the beginning, and, I think everyone kind of knows that when it really turned from that to something different for us anyway was the pandemic.
yeah, absolutely.
And that hotline just started lighting up.
Oh,
Mhm. Unbelievable. So you used a couple of phrases I want to dig a little deeper. The like breach coach. You mentioned breach coach and then privacy counsel. Could you elaborate on like what do you mean by breach coach?
I use those terms sometimes sort of interchangeably. A lot of times, I think sometimes the advice that we give spans both legal and practical, right?
Mhm.
A lot of times clients, especially when something has occurred, whether it be an email compromise or ransomware attack, one of the first things that they want to do is tell everyone or tell someone or who should we tell, what should we do? And so one of the biggest things that I think, that we pride ourselves on is getting everyone to kind of take a step back. And so our legal role is to tell them, do they have notice obligations? Who must they tell? The states, the individuals, and we also maintain the attorney-client privilege. And we'll go out and hire other professionals that so well. the forensic IT firms, public relations firms.
Yeah.
And so, one of the reasons why I like the term coach sometimes, or almost like the quarterback, is you're not just being the attorney, you're kind of spearheading the response team, and so everyone's reporting to you on those aspects, and putting the team together from the internal IT to the external forensics. And so I think that's why the term coach has gotten a lot of play in the last few years.
Yeah, that's very fitting.
Yeah, it really makes sense. So the types of cyber attacks that you and your team see, can you just from a high level explain kind of what you're seeing on a regular basis? I mean,
sure. I think everyone wants to talk about ransomware, and we see plenty of ransomware attacks. And as you probably talked about this on your pod before, that ransomware, the concerns have sort of changed over the years. Originally, everyone thought of ransomware as just locking down and encrypting your file so you can't access it. Well, now it seems that the bigger concern, really sort of transformed a few years ago, was not just the attempted encryption. Some of the criminals don't even attempt that anymore. It's using the tool to steal, and as we call it, exfiltrate data out of the system.
Yeah,
use that to extort.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, several people have used the phrase extortion as a service.
Yeah.
Like leveraging a ransomware tool set, but it's really extortion as a service.
Yep, exactly. And so we deal with that obviously a lot. Business email compromises are always going to be a continuing issue. And
how do you
there
define
multiple
business? Yeah, let me
Just
talk
for
about
some of
that,
the listeners
because
may not
that's
know.
really common. That's really common, and
We
it's
see
very
that a lot.
effective.
really
we see it a
common.
lot. Yeah.
So for a business email compromise, a criminal finds a way into your email account. Most of the time Office 365, and we say business because it's usually business, not your personal Yahoo account.
Right.
And the reason, there's many reasons for that. Again, you have the data theft, that's taking out of the data from that inbox. But another thing too, one of the leading reasons for that is, a secondary scheme, such as a fraudulent funds transfer, right? They'll try and manipulate contacts that you have to wire money, making them think it's you, or making you think someone is emailing you that you owe money to. And so the business email compromises has a lot to it, not just the, okay, what's in there? Is there confidential information in there? Is there personal health information in there? Is there that I have to tell people about? But also, why is the access gained in the first place? And that might be to try to leverage fraudulent funds transfers. Right?
Yep.
Absolutely. We've seen it in situations too, where someone in leadership at an organization is, say, speaking at a large convention, and it's coming up, and that's all over social media. Well, they know that, and if they're able to compromise that account, right, they might have compromised the account and have just been spying on it, and then they see them going, and then while they're there, they'll be like, "Hey, I'm over here, just about to go on, I forgot to get this vendor paid. Could you please do this? I'll circle back with you tomorrow," using the language that they'll do. It's a pretty effective social engineering tactic.
It's really effective. And, I've had a lot of clients and a lot of people I've consulted in the past say, well, how did they know this information? This had to come from within. And I was like, well, I'm on your LinkedIn page right now.
Right.
And it tells me you're speaking in North Carolina. Right. Exactly. Today. So, it doesn't have to, that information is publicly available, whatever you put out on your social media, your whereabouts, your role, your title in the company. It's available on basic websites.
That's such a case now. And it's almost, we refer to it, and I'm seeing more and more people refer to it in what to do in case of an event. Right. It's not just the ransomware anymore. David, you and I spoke to that regional bank about 2 weeks ago. Unfortunately, it was right of boom. It was post event. But they went straight to the Active Directory. They found HR. They went in and found one of the least tenured individuals in the accounting department and did a fraudulent wire transfer request. And she didn't know the process. And so she did it and started out, it was 7 figures. They were able to recover a lot, but that was within a 90-minute window. Like they didn't plan on ransomwaring anybody. They weren't even going to exfiltrate. They knew exactly what to do, where to go, and how to do it. So yeah, it's amazing the speed at which they operate now too.
Yeah, it's professionals. That's what their profession is, and they are oftentimes supported by powerful governments and other entities, and that's their job is to pull these off. And it can. It really, I think one of your points is going to be on this podcast. It can really happen to anyone, any size of business, large, small, across various and every entity and every profession.
Yep.
Well, in the legal context too, the way I'm evolving and looking at this is, it's going to happen, and when it does, they're not all created the same. Like the ramifications of a data breach or an event, it's going to shine a light on your organization or what your organization is doing. And it's either going to show, and tell me what you think about this, but it's either going to show, look, they were doing best practices and this group was just persistent and they got through, but they triaged and they handled it. They were prepared, and yeah, it's going to hurt, but they're going to recover, as opposed to it shines a light on it and they really were negligent. They really were not doing the best practices. It exposes all of these issues. What is that something like, are you seeing kind of both ends of the spectrum there?
Definitely. And one of the reasons why, that I always think of it like this is that I think of prevention and response as a whole, right?
Yeah.
Because like you said, you can use every preventative measure that you can, and someone can still pull off a pretty major security event. And so when you look at prevention and response and mitigation as one package, right? And one of the best ways that I can put it is that you can take all the steps you want to prevent a ransomware attack.
Mm-hmm.
And, a criminal, we call them threat actors, can still get into your network.
Yep.
Well, what we're seeing a lot more now than we saw 4 or 5 years ago is we oftentimes don't have the need to pay for that decryption tool, because companies have learned about better backup solutions, right? Air-gapped cloud-based backup. So the event still occurred, but the fallout was not nearly as great, right?
Yep.
And those companies that maybe have an endpoint detection, right, that detect the movement quicker in the network, maybe they can stop it before the data is pulled out.
Yep.
And so when you look at all these preventative tools, whether it be education of employees, whether it be, a biannual look under the hood of your IT practices, whatever those practices are that you're employing, you're putting together your incident response plan, making sure you know who the contacts are, looking at it as, okay, we're not just trying to prevent this, but in the event that something happens, we're going to make the ramifications and the fallout, as manageable and as least harmful to our business and our clients as possible. And so we look at it from preventing all the way through rectifying an event that occurs.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the consequences of it, how severe it is, depends on how much you focus on prevention.
Yeah, you know what? I also think it's really interesting. It's because of my role, obviously cyber risk insurance and cyber insurance is something that is sort of near and dear to me and in my practice that, that I have to think about daily. But I think that this industry has put more effort into preventative. Like, most of the times, all right, you get an insurance policy. Let's just, if something bad happens, we got you. But the insurance carriers and their companies have taken much more of a proactive role. It's like a healthcare company paying for wellness visits, or a healthcare company paying for a gym membership.
Great analogy.
Right?
Great analogy.
And these carriers have woken up and said, look, in the end, we're gonna focus more than any other type of industry on preventing and making, again, that holistic approach, right? Prevention, and if something happens, mitigating.
Yeah.
So it's been really interesting to see over the last few years how that involvement has occurred and how much resources companies like that have put into helping people prevent the event in the first place.
Amazing.
Yeah, look at the applications. I mean, years ago it was one page, and now,
right.
It's really a best practice in industry standards and cybersecurity practices that you've got to be able to check each box just to get that application processed now, right?
I work with a company that through their underwriting process, they use a technology vendor, and what they do is they go through and they not only, hey, do you have multi-factor authentication? Mm-hmm. They test it, and if they don't, and if it doesn't pass muster, then they don't get that checkbox.
Right.
And so they can still get the insurance, but it's going to be more because they have that problem, right?
Right. Or lower limits or something like that.
Yeah,
right.
But we'll help you fix it, right? And then the limits are going to go up and the premium's going to go down. And so again, that is just the whole idea of, this industry taking the whole concept that it's not just about, all right, remedying a breach and responding to a breach. It's about what steps can you take to prevent it? What steps can you take in advance to make the fallout, as little as possible on the outset? And so it's a perfect example, Mark.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about the threat actors? One thing that always seems to surprise people is that it's generally not illegal in the regions of the world where they live, or it's at least not prosecuted, meaning, like, let's say a ransomware group is located in a portion of Russia, so long as they don't attack CIS countries, right, then no one's going to bother them generally. What can you share with us about, in your investigations, what you're seeing about who these groups are, who these people are?
Well, I think one of the things too to understand is it's not just that it's not potentially illegal where they're operating, is that our government has worked diligently to find out that they're being funded and harbored by countries. And my attitude over these last few years it's a form of warfare, right?
Absolutely.
You attack infrastructure, you attack healthcare, right? Mm-hmm. These industries aren't by accident, right? I was at a conference last month, and a statistic was put to me that at a hospital, the mortality rate 6 weeks after a ransomware attack, it's a 30% higher mortality rate.
Wow.
Right?
Because they can't access data. Yeah, they can't access data. It used to be the nurse or the doctor would have everything on a physical chart and be able to go, well, we can't prescribe this medication because it would counteract with what they're taking. When someone's unconscious or they don't remember or they don't know the dosage they're on or whatever, right? And they can't access that prior data, there's issues. And that's also just one small example.
Right. Well, also you have situations where if depending upon what machines are affected, you can't take somebody to an emergency room, and depending on where you are in the country, the next one might be 30 minutes away.
Right. Exactly.
Right? And so
we've seen that. Yeah.
Right. And so my best comment on the threat actor groups, what I can say is that going beyond it not being illegal, like countries, nation states, like harboring and probably taking the profits, right? Getting a monetary kickback, right, to allow this to occur, and getting protection during investigations. And we have the OFAC sanctions list here.
I was just about to say, doesn't that tie to the issue of what if they are, if the investigation ties them to a country that we are not allowed to pay, right?
Yep.
Like, so do you guys get involved in like evaluating whether OFAC could potentially be involved or risk involved there?
There's been a few instances where, with the OFAC sanctions list and there are also sanctions lists, other sanctions lists that are, European, British that we'll look at as well. But we have, the governments have identified certain groups that either one are essentially a nation state, or two are operating, are either being funded by or being sheltered by countries or groups that we consider to be terrorists. And it's highly frowned upon to the point of maybe being called illegal, right, to make the payments. And then if you do make a payment, you can, and the Department of Justice finds out about it, you're probably going to hear from them, right?
Well, and we just saw that at isn't it Caesars? I think it was Caesars, where the Department of Justice is now combing through that, because Caesars compared to MGM didn't pay. They fought them, and unfortunately for them, like during the time when they were down, you literally had thousands of people with iPhones walking around videotaping it. Like, that's a PR nightmare. But they recovered and they stand by their decision. And in hindsight, they did the right thing. It was the hard thing, but they did it. Caesars, they paid and they didn't suffer that business interruption, but now they've got the department. At least some reports indicate that the Department of Justice is like looking into that, because they're like, well, who did you pay?
Yeah,
what happened?
Where'd the money go?
Right?
Yeah, we've had those. I've been involved in those type of discussions.
Yeah,
right?
that's tough. Yeah,
it is, and
yeah. Please share with us your work, your attorney-client privilege, if anything.
Yeah.
Please just let's talk about that story. No, I'm just kidding.
Right, but those, just anecdotally, those can be the types of decisions that companies have to make.
Oh yeah, it's tough.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about that a little. So, first, let's we hear a lot about the class actions that spawn. Whenever there's tragedy, there's always some legal event that can occur on it for various reasons, right? Discovery, rights that are violated, compensation that's needed for victims. There's a bunch of very valid reasons. What are some of the legal grounds that some of the class actions are generally brought on?
Good question.
Can they tie RICO into it for this? Or is it negligence? What are some of the grounds?
So, in my practice, I kind of put the types of privacy class actions that I have into a few different buckets, and how they come about. We talked about ransomware, right?
Yep.
Ransomware or data exfiltration. So the way that these come about in that situation is that once it's determined where the threat actor was in the network and maybe what they took out of the network, right? If there's personally identifiable information, PII or PHI in that information, you have, depending upon various laws and states, you have the responsibility to tell, government agencies, but also the individuals, right?
Right.
Yeah.
When these notifications go to this, whether it be attorney, the AG of a state, or the Health and Human Services, and they get posted publicly, right?
Mm-hmm.
Plaintiffs' class action firms will post on their website, if you were a member, if you received notice of this breach, come out, talk to us, and we'll, you might be entitled to compensation, basically.
Yeah.
And so then the lawsuit is filed as a class action for that individual and for all people who receive notices of it, right? And we've been involved in situations where it's a 7-figure notice, right? You give notice to several million people, or even if you give notice to 50,000 people, right? It's a big deal. And then we also do,
for the victim company, it's got to be huge. Even if there's no lawsuit, if you're going to just offer credit monitoring for 1 million people, that's expensive.
Yeah, right.
Right.
and finding out who those 1 million people are.
Yeah, and sending out the notice, the actual cards that go out, the communications, calibrating all of that, the logistics. It's a
mining that data, depending on how large it is, can be hundreds of thousands, if not more than $1 million, right? That alone, just finding that out, that's before you ever get to a class action, right?
Right.
That's before you give notice. So, and then what I've also been doing a lot lately are sort of the data tracking or pixel litigation, right? So when you go to a website and they're, people almost expect it now that you'll go to a store's website and maybe you're looking to buy a new chair, and all of a sudden you go to your email account and there's a banner with a bunch of new chairs that look like the one you just.
Right.
No, that never happens.
Right.
That
Yeah.
never happens.
Right?
No.
And so, I do a lot of the data tracking litigation as well. So there's a couple different things that I always have to talk about. One is, the various types of litigation. Those are, what does your outward facing website look like? And what data are you taking?
Harvesting. Yeah.
Who are you sending it to?
Right.
And did you tell the individuals who visit your website you were doing it?
Right.
So those are a couple,
But
obviously
when they accept cookies, right? They just
right?
click that accept cookies. It's all good. Nobody reads the 50 pages that were written by an intelligent
That's not
attorney.
a plated chocolate chip coming to your front door.
Right.
That's right.
You just gave away everything.
So one of the reasons why I gave that background is to talk about some of the causes of action as claims we're seeing. So in the sort of the ransomware where you give notice, the business email compromise where you give notice to a lot of people, good old fashioned negligence is really a lot of times what it boils down to.
Really?
And
so there's a valid cause of action just on because negligence is fairly easy to prove as opposed to fraud in the inducement or anything like that. So
negligence around the country, it's one of the things about some of these lawsuits is laws still being made virtually every day.
Yeah.
Right? So the negligence theory is that by either some sort of statute or by the common law, you have a duty to those people that you require them to give you their personal information, or that you assume a duty once you accept it and store it, and that you breach that duty. And so those lawsuits always comes down that you take reasonable steps,
right,
to protect their data,
which makes it really complicated because there is no standard necessarily, right? There is no clear delineation of a company with 100 to 500 employees, a local mortgage company needs to do these 10 steps. And then you could say, you didn't do 8 of them, you were negligent. There's no clear-cut rule set. I mean, there's best practices, there's things that people recommend, but it all kind of depends on the risk appetite.
It does.
The owner's risk appetite.
Kind of the scary part of it, David, is that no matter what you do, when somebody looks at something in hindsight, it's always 2020. Well, okay, here are the 300 things you could have did if you did 299, you should have done this one too. And so, as with anything, size of business matters. Nature of business matters. Right? If you're in the business of handling healthcare information, if you're in the business of,
financial industry, if you
have
certain compliance regulations, right?
Right. So if you're in regulated industries that that have statutes talking about protecting the data, like that could be different than an entity that's not, like a manufacturing company.
Exactly.
And so that's why you look at the nature of the business, the size of the business. Even the revenues make a big deal, right? A company that has $5 million in revenues can't spend $7 million in internet security.
Right.
A company that has $4 billion in revenues can spend lots of money, right, to protect their network. And so, it's always that, in the legal field, the question of fact, right?
Right.
And some expert will be paid to get up there and say that, no, this was deficient in these ways, and this is what you should have done. And had you done this, it would have prevented this. And
unbelievable.
Then there's the contrary position. Like, no, you look at this as a regional health facility, right? That has $1 million in revenues and is government funded, and they're doing everything they can to help patients within 80 miles of their location.
Right.
They couldn't operate if they were required to do all this, and this. And so that's where the fight lies on the negligence. We see breach of contracts a lot. And
really?
You would think,
that's
breach of contract, how can there be a contract?
Yeah. Is it like a social contract that we have?
There's a couple different things, a couple theories out there that have that sometimes pass muster, again, depending upon the state, right?
Right, of course, sure.
But a lot of companies put internet privacy policies, right?
Oh,
or they'll put or they'll hand you policies, and when you somewhere or another, when you when you do business with them, it's often over the internet. It can be commercial,
Right.
and some privacy policies will say, we do not share your data. We do
Right.
not do this, and this. Right. When in fact you do share my data.
Right. Which a lot of consumers look for before they'll do business with you. And when they see that, that's the contingent, the condition preceding for them to do business with you. And then all of a sudden you're like, I bet you're sharing my data.
Which, before I buy that coat online, that's exactly the process I work through.
Right. Well, then there's also the theory that implied contract exists. You require me to give you my PII
in
order to stay at your hotel, casino.
Mm-hmm.
I must give this information in order to stay there. And part of that deal has to be that I'm paying for you to protect my information.
Right.
And so, or I would have paid less had I known you weren't going to. Or I wouldn't have stayed at your hotel.
Right. I would have gone somewhere else. Like nobody wants to do business with somebody that's going to lose your stuff. Like I don't want to fly in an airlines that's going to lose my luggage. I don't want to give you my credit card if I know it's going to be sold.
Yeah. You're not doing anything to protect information.
Yeah.
And then state Consumer Deceptive Practices Act claims.
Yes.
Right?
That's what I was curious about.
Yeah. Every state has most states anyway have a Consumer Fraud and Deceptive Practices Act or whatnot that really, and even though it doesn't fit in there.
That's harder to prove though, isn't it? I mean, that seems harder to prove. I think I would, as a trial lawyer, I would probably just want to go the basic negligence route. You've got a question of fact. You can get past summary judgment. You can get to a trial.
Some Deceptive Practices Act claims apply a negligence standard.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
Right. Because they might be based upon negligent misrepresentations, right?
Yeah.
We are the industry leader in data privacy and security.
Yeah, exactly.
And I wouldn't have used you as my cloud server had I known that you really aren't.
That's where the marketing department needs to talk to legal up front, right? The part of the marketing needs to talk to legal up front. Absolutely.
Yeah, and then we also see a lot of times invasion of privacy. And when you think old school invasion of privacy, someone came into my home, someone's looking through my window, somebody told 3 million people that I have this medical condition,
right?
But now that these attorneys are trying to talk about, it doesn't have to be a physical space, right? You invaded this computer system that has my personal and sensitive data, and now my privacy has been invaded by the fact that my private information is no longer private.
Right.
And state to state, federal court to federal court, you might get a different answer on some of these questions, and there can be varied nuances, to every jurisdiction we're in. I have class action lawsuits from literally from New York to California and pretty much everywhere in between. And you can get a different answer on exact same set of facts.
Wow.
Unbelievable.
Wow.
You can get a different answer down the hall.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
You are in Chicago, so it's all going to be different in different boroughs, different sections.
There's no consistency here.
No, not at all. Let me ask you this. So from the human side of it, what happens after a breach? Like, what are the different entities that have to get involved? How much does a business owner personally have to get involved? Like, when we've interviewed people that have gone through attacks and, all of their icons turn white. There's a lovely note from Russia that says, get on a talks channel. And they're like, I don't even know what that is. Right.
Right.
And so who does that? Like, can you walk us through just high level kind of?
Sure. When we use ransomware as an example, like the first thing that's going to happen is someone's going to find out about it. It's going to be it's either your in-house IT or your managed services provider, IT company, or somebody's going to try and open up their, log in and they just can't. Everything's down. And so once that occurs, and once, it's usually confirmed by, again, some sort of local IT professional, then, and it's reported, the first people that get hired are an attorney, which we call privacy attorney or breach coach. Those, they get hired, one, to make sure that everything, to the extent that can be about the investigation, is privileged, right? The outset, the attorney's work, the work really is maintaining that privilege, right? That this investigation is going to be, for now and hopefully later, private and privileged.
And that attorney and we always say to keep them out of the news, right? That's the whole, that's really the benefit. If you can keep it just a technical issue that can be resolved, and it could still be expensive, but at least it's not reputation damaging.
Sure.
Long term.
Yeah.
Forensic IT company is generally brought in, and they'll work together with the boots on the ground IT. So the forensics are coming in to see
if there's a back door. If they left a back door, they can get back in. Whole bunch of things, right?
Yeah. So it's these things kind of happen on dual tracks: the investigation of what happened, trying to remediate it, and first off, turn the harm out, make sure there's no ongoing harm. Find out how it happened, how you can prevent it in the future, while at the same time, there's usually remediation efforts going on so that the company can get, to the extent it can, be operational during this investigation. Yeah. And then, depending upon what's found, if a lot of data is at issue and you have to find out every individual's information who's involved, it's called data mining. You hire companies to find ways to get to that data and get those answers. You'll have to give notice to these people. So you hire a company that provides notice, and generally along with that notice is an offer of credit monitoring. And those people, we usually have a call center put up so that someone can call in and ask and answer questions. If it is a really reported media event, and for certain public relations firms can get hired to put out messaging, especially in the bigger ones where companies everyone knows about. Public relations firms do usually get involved at the outset. And then this is all just responding to the incident itself.
That's the initial triage.
Wow.
Right? That's the initial triage.
Yeah. Wow. And then in this event, you cross your fingers and hope that one of the people that you sent the letter to doesn't find a class action lawyer and file a lawsuit.
Well, there's not that many lawyers in the United States. So good. Like,
amazing how
risk is low. That happens.
It's amazing how it's the same ones all the time.
Well, of course. Yeah, right. Yes. Every time I get let's not even, like, every time I get an offer of credit monitoring, it is followed by multiple calls from trial attorneys, postcards, everything else. It's like a traffic accident, right? You just get a million of them. Like, I have no idea how you found me, but you found me.
You found me.
Yeah.
But
so from the owner's perspective, let's say from the victim organization, some of the leaders there, like, then the litigation begins, right? And then there's depositions. There's an emotional toll. Like, we've talked to some, like, immediate breach responder to technical resources, and they said they've been on Zoom meetings with business owners that have passed out.
Broken down. Yeah.
They've broken down crying. They've passed out. They're like, it's very emotional, isn't it?
It's extremely emotional, and especially depending on the type of business you're in. But the way that I always think about it like this, we just went through some of the things that will occur, and you have the emotional toll of maybe your business is not being able to operate, and I have a couple of healthcare matters going on right now for small companies, and the owner was crying because they couldn't provide service. And she's like, these people need the care, right? So there can be that, or I can't let this client down. They need this by this date, and I can't produce it, right? They've been my client for 30 years, and I can't do it for them. So there's that. And then you start thinking about the cost, right? And if you're you start thinking about the cost of some of the things that I've went through, right? And you might have $1 million in insurance coverage, something like that. That goes pretty quick. right?
Yeah, that's
And
the
people's
and
businesses.
most people don't realize that.
Yeah.
Most people don't realize that.
Yeah, it's data mining. Like I was talking about data mining, that can be $500,000 if it's bulk data.
Right. And that comes right off the coverage of that $1 million.
Right
Legal counsel, the initial triage, of the technical resources, all that comes right off the top.
Right. And if you're if you're a business that does, several $1 million in revenue, and revenue is not profit, right? That's just revenue.
Right.
And once these things start getting explained to you, long before you ever thought of a class action, your viability as a business flashes before your eyes.
Oh, yeah.
Everything I've worked for, right? Is it going to be gone?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Right. And so when I was talking about being a breach coach, right, and it's not just all about legal advice. In those, I've had hundreds of those conversations with business owners.
Gotta be.
And hey, we're going to get you through this. And you find yourself, our law firm says attorneys and counselors, and you find yourself being a counselor in that situation, right? And that's, and people think, well, I am only a few million in revenue or 10 million, whatever it might be. I'm not who they're after. And day in and day out, it proves not to be the case.
Yeah. It just goes to show that everybody can and is a target. And whenever you get online, you enter that world. You enter their world.
There's no rules.
Yeah.
There is not. I mean, there, some entities are some types of businesses are more prone to attack than others. I mean, finance, health, law, those type of things. But manufacturing, it's all of it, right? There's nothing real. There's no one who's really immune from it. No. And I because of some of the insurance programs that we work on, where we act as the first point of contact, we've taken 1,200 calls.
Wow.
And yeah, and you've seen it all, and so there's nothing that can be surprising. And somebody, well, it's not going to happen to this type of business. It's not going to happen. The answer is no one's immune.
And it hasn't happened yet.
Right, it hasn't happened yet. Right, exactly the way to put it.
Well, Jamie, thank you so much. I mean, before we wrap up, based on what you've seen, and what types of defenses can CEOs and leaders in organizations of small, mid-sized businesses, any size, what can they think about and make sure that they're doing better in light of what you've seen? What are some of the best practices that somebody from your perspective? I mean, we tell them all the time, and but sometimes it falls on deaf ears because they're like, oh, you're just trying to provide a security layer for them. And we're like, well, yeah, but you need this
if you to be able to
mitigate your risk.
Right.
Whether you go with us or somebody else, please do this.
The way that I look at it is because people think, they're business owners. Oh, I don't know anything about all this IT stuff. Right. I don't even understand it. I don't know.
They always think it's an IT problem. It's just an IT problem. It's just a tech problem.
We've got a firewall. We're good.
Yeah. Well, that firewall might be good, but if your employee opens up an email and
they're letting
provides
them in
their credentials,
right? It's Mrs. Buttermaker over in the third floor cubicle, who is an educated and great employee, by the way, but she's going to let him in around all of those systems that you've invested in.
Right. I always equate it to the deadbolt on the front door, right? Like you got this top of the line Stanley deadbolt and nobody can get through it. But yeah, if your crazy Uncle Larry just goes and opens the door for anybody who knocks and lets them in, it doesn't matter what deadbolt you have.
Doesn't matter.
Or if you hear that every Wednesday morning there's break-ins in your neighborhood through the window in the laundry rooms of all these homes, but you've got this really steel Stanley door locked front door, what good is that going to do? Right. Because the MO, the modus operandi of of the threat actor right now is this. And so that's why you have to know about what they're doing.
I look at it from a couple different ways. a big part of it, so that like we've talked about prevention, we've talked about responding, right? I look at it holistically. One, the training of the employee is just extremely important.
Absolutely.
Because no matter all of these all these advancements in cybersecurity that you can get from an IT standpoint, endpoint monitoring, all this and that, again, it doesn't matter if you're let in the door, right?
Right.
And common mistakes being made by employees. So my law firm sends out test emails like that, test phishing emails.
Yep.
And we'll report back 15% of you provided your credentials.
Right. That's what we do. That's what our operations center does. And statistically, it's even higher than that.
Yeah, it's usually 30%.
Like, it's crazy. Yeah. What's funny too is so many organizations, when I talk to leaders at, I like, let's just say a decision maker or a leader in that type of organization, you talk to them and they're like, we know how to spot a fish. We understand social engineering. We got this. Like, we don't need that training. We had that training for an hour a year ago. So we're good. Right. And you're like, oh my gosh, like, no, like it has to be part of like, almost like professional development. It has to be ongoing, job embedded.
Yeah, you're right. And what I've likened it to is that, like sexual harassment training. Like when you walk in the door at any employer, you go through and training, and then you sign that you went through this training. Yeah.
Right.
And here where I'm at in Illinois, in my law firm, every December before the end of the year, we must complete that training. Yep.
Which is like 4 hours long.
Right. Online.
You get like 20 minutes of cyber training.
Right. Exactly. And so I've told companies, I was like, why don't you treat your cybersecurity training like you treat that training?
Right. Because we're not saying don't do the 4 hours of the harassment training, because that's needed. We're not saying that. What we're saying is, can we even the scale out? Like, because the consequence of a violation economically and reputationally to your organization is just as severe, if not more severe.
100%.
Yeah.
Right.
And we talked about fraudulent funds transfers a little bit. 95, maybe more % could be prevented if the person picked up the phone, made a phone call, and said, "Hey, are these your wire instructions?"
Right.
Yeah.
And that's just a policy, right? If you just create a policy, and then it's very low cost, it's just a very practical thing to do.
That's what we tell people: be politely paranoid, trust, but verify.
Yeah.
Right. And even at a company, a firm that's got 20-something offices like mine, and it's a big business, on certain dollar levels, we have one person that can push the button.
Right.
Yeah.
And if that person's not available, that money's just not going out.
It's not going anywhere.
Right. It's not going anywhere. And, so I think that employee training on these issues is paramount, even for the greatest, even for the companies that spend a lot of money in the IT security. And then, on the IT security issues, this is what I would say is I would put the people to the test, right? On a couple of issues. Like, I really think that there's, even me, a lawyer, that I can understand, okay, if everything was shut down, how is it backed up? Where is it at?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And figuring out that solution, because if your backup is in any way tied to your system,
right,
consider it wiped out.
Yeah. Because threat actors are not dumb at all. And they're very good at what they do. They'll go in and do that, because what people don't understand is they're inside the network undetected for a long time before something happens. So by the time something happens, trust me, running to get your backups, like they were already there. They were there before the Super Bowl. And now, right? I mean,
exactly. I don't understand how this solution was, but one company that I represented, they're like, there's no way they could have done this, because we back up every Friday and then take it off site. And I was like, they were in there for 2 months.
Right.
They know you do that on Friday. And
Yeah.
Took them
that's when
home
they
with you every Friday.
Right.
Right.
And that's when they executed.
They are across the telescope with a telescope. Oh, they're across the street with a telescope and a box
Yeah.
of donuts, watching you take
Yeah.
the thing home every Friday. Like
Exactly.
they know
And
what's
so
going on. Right.
They just zapped your backup while it was,
Yeah.
while you thought you were
Right.
backing up.
Yeah.
So like understanding and your backup solution, like I talked about it earlier, how we, paying for decryption tools has gone so far down, at least in my experience, and that the number one thing is because people have an effective backup solution.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Really, really important. Well, and the importance of real-time detection, right? Like if they can catch them and if they can lessen the amount of time that they are inside the network, otherwise undetected, right? I mean, doesn't that help? Like if they're able,
of course.
yeah, I mean, if they're able to find them in real time, moving around the network, spotting those anomalies, I would think that is critical.
Instead of finding out 6 months later.
Well,
Right.
instead of waiting until after it's launched and then months later, and then trying to triage or stop it and restore, like that's very powerful. But if we could have caught them earlier, wouldn't that make more sense?
Yeah, I mean, solid endpoint protection and monitoring, and system monitoring has saved a lot of companies. And the malware gets quarantined real quick. Yeah, it's still an event. It's still going to cost some money, but
But there's a difference between being in the news and it just being an incident that needs to be remedied, right?
Exactly. And so, for sure.
Amazing.
But so it's a combination of the employee training and then just the basic understanding of your IT, like it's backups, multi-factor.
Yeah.
How do you access your system remotely, right? Who do you need remote access? And if so,
right. Really good point. Really good point about the remote access.
Yeah. So, I mean, people have gotten a lot better. Remote desktop protocol over the pandemic, it was the Wild West. And that's why you saw this huge spike.
Yeah.
Now, much more secure and safe because we've caught up to it as well. So understanding those basics, and then also a policy and understanding on how you store data, right?
Yeah, you and I spoke about that before the podcast. Yeah, like there's so many organizations that will save data themselves. They'll email things to themselves or they'll email things internally. And once that is compromised, all of that stuff can be grabbed.
I mean, we when an email account gets compromised, we'll try our best to like narrow it down. But I'll say consider everything in your Outlook to have been compromised.
Right.
And you've saved every email that you've received since 2012.
Right.
Right?
All
that's a powerful statement. If you think about
protection.
that for a minute, that's really powerful for an end user because nobody really thinks like that. But consider everything in your Outlook has been compromised.
Yeah.
I mean, I just see eyes just open, like, whoa.
Yeah. And so what's your policy on quarantining or archiving emails? Second level of protection for old emails that you have to save. Well, we don't have any of this data. Well, this server has been in your environment since 2012, and it's everything you saved on it has now been compromised.
Yeah.
People are like, I didn't even know we had that data. Like, yep.
Right. Yeah. Wow. Think about that. Well, think about this too. By the time some end version of work product reaches somebody in leadership, it's been passed back and forth repeatedly by via email internally between teams. And you're like, there are so many processes, policies that can be put in place or platforms where you can just keep things encrypted and secure and work from there to silo it as opposed to sharing it via email.
Right. And
it doesn't help, again, getting back to that user training, it doesn't help that we always reuse passwords. So, and that's what's protecting our email, right? Like, I've got a great password. I'm going to use it on
everything.
Right? I hear that all the time.
Yeah, we have forced password resets here, I think,
every day. Every day.
It's about
like have to reset.
Yeah, and it's also it's about diligence. It's you've got to stay diligent, because the people that are trying to get into your network and steal your data and steal your money, they're diligent.
Yeah. Jamie, thank you so much. This was really eye-opening. This was really good. Unbelievable what it's like the Wild West, and then it always kind of winds up in lawyers' hands. And I'm glad you're involved, at least, because you get it. So that's really good. What do you have coming up? What's on your horizon? Are you doing any public speaking? You going to trial soon? Anything you could share?
Spring break.
Spring break.
Well, I'll just tell you, we talked about the class actions, and they're coming in seemingly daily, and
unbelievable,
all across the country. And so it's really interesting for me is that our law firm does have 22 offices, I think. So I probably more than anyone in our Chicago office, I get to work with a lot of the attorneys in our other offices, because we need our New York attorney on this case. We need our California offices involved. We need our Georgia offices involved in this one. Yeah. And so I've really enjoyed getting to know some of my partners and associates in other offices, because it's all over the country, and we're trying to speak with a consistent voice on how we respond to these. And so, and then I'll be in that diligence in May. So
unbelievable. Hey, well, thank you so much for your time, and thank you
that was some great insight
for all you do.
Yeah. I appreciate you having me on. It was a lot of fun.
Absolutely fascinating. We didn't ask, and I want to end with this, but like, when you were younger and you were thinking what you were going to grow up, I was like, I'm going to be Batman in the courtroom, Dad. Like, what did you like? How did you eventually migrate into? Because when we were younger, at least when Mark and I were younger, like, data breaches didn't exist. This wasn't a thing. The crime did, and the same type of acts did. Extortion did, stealing of funds, wire transfers, all that still existed, but it wasn't at scale like it is today. Like, what led you into this field?
So early in my career as a lawyer, I've been practicing for 23, like 20-something years. Early in my career, I did for a while almost exclusively legal malpractice. So legal malpractice and legal ethics. And so I represented a lot of lawyers. And, that's kind of a different skill in and of itself, having a lawyer as a client.
Yep.
And so one of the programs that we first got tied into, that our firm first got asked to be the breach response counsel, the coordination counsel for the breach response. The program was called Safe Law. And so it was for only a law firm program. And I was approached saying, hey, you've long had lawyers as clients. We think that you have the bedside manner to deal with these law firms when they're going through breaches. And I said, sure. And, for a while, it was maybe 10% of my practice when it first started that way.
Oh, this was when law firms were being breached.
Okay.
Yeah.
Come to you
so
guys.
one of the programs
sense.
that I work for is called Safe Law.
Yeah,
it's
that
a
makes
program designed
sense.
for protecting law firms.
Yeah.
And so I got, we started the hotline for that. It was like, okay, it's going to be lawyers calling. We think you would be good at this because, or at least, settling everyone down on the initial triage call, because you routinely represent lawyers. And it just grew so much that now it's essentially the entirety of my practice.
Wow. Yeah. That's really cool.
Yeah. It's funny how you stumble upon something, right? And it kind of changes your life.
I like that. That's really cool.
Well, it makes total sense. Well, I think business is going to be up. Crime's up. Cybercrime's up. So I think
I'm telling you guys, I'm feeling this is something that's going to go away. This is just a blip on the radar.
It's just a trend.
It's just going to go away.
Just like crime has always gone away throughout the history of our world.
Yeah, crime always goes away, and technology clearly goes away. It's not like there's any advancements. There's no advancements in technology.
No longevity in either.
Yeah, AI and deepfake won't be anything that we'll have to worry about for the next couple of years.
Just scratching the surface.
That's a whole other episode. We'll have to bring you back for an episode.
I was going to say, we need to bring you back. Yeah, we need to bring you back like on a panel. That would be really good.
Yeah,
I'd love to come back. This was a lot of fun.
That would be fantastic. Cool. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jamie, thank you so much, man.
Yeah, thank you. That was really good.
All right,
Excellent.
guys, take care. Hope the audience likes it too.
Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah.
Well, that wraps this up. Thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed our episode. The next one is coming right up. We appreciate you making this an award-winning podcast and downloading on Apple and Spotify and subscribing to our YouTube channel. This is Cybercrime Junkies, and we thank you for watching.